Well, I think you guys might have chosen the better part. I think this might be our best Christmas service. I love that song. Thank you, Ted. That's literally my favorite hymn, my favorite version of the Magnificat. Mary's vision of God's world turned upside down and so made right. And we sing, O come, Emmanuel, the deep strains of longing. And on the other hand, we sing rejoice in the next phrase, in the next statement. This Advent Christmas kind of mashup, I think, is so appropriate for where we find ourselves in this world today. Asking Mary's question, how can this be? Now, we chose that phrase, that little question, as kind of our theme for Advent. You might have noticed it on our Advent flyers and on our banner out front. We had a whole 2-hour quiet day when we reflected on the meaning of, we looked at the whole lesson, the gospel that we just heard this morning. So I've had a lot of time to think about that question, and the first layer, it's got so many layers and so much possibility to it, but the first layer is obviously just a logistical question. And it's kind of interesting to me. Mary must have been a very practical person, because here this angel announces all this astonishing news, you'll reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end. And she's like, but how? Just, what are the technicalities of this? Are you directing me to have some sort of premarital liaison with my fiance, or what's going to happen here? And the angel tells her something even more mysterious, if there could be something more mysterious, which is the power of the Most High will overshadow you. What a thing. To me, it speaks to the heart of a mystic, to be overshadowed, to be enveloped by God. But I have to think there's maybe another layer to Mary's question, because she knew, it wasn't an uncommon occurrence, maybe outside of the norm, but not unheard of, that a woman out of wedlock would become pregnant. And she knew that in her culture, in her day, in her time, such women were liable to be stoned, right? So she may be thinking about her safety at this point. How will it be that this child that I'm to bring into the world will be the Messiah, will be the King, and I'm not, how will I be safe, And that's why I think it's so wonderful that Mary's not alone in her miraculous pregnancy. I think it's one of the most beautiful and maybe overlooked aspects of Luke's gospel, that when the angel reassures her, he says, and your cousin, your relative Elizabeth, the one that was said to be barren, is also carrying a child, and she's in the 6th month. And if you read the Gospel of Luke, you'll see that the very next thing Mary does after she hears the angel's news is she travels all the way from Nazareth to the hill country around Jerusalem to visit Elizabeth. And she stays with her 3 months. Now 6 plus 3, she stays to the birth of John the Baptist, right? She accompanies her cousin, her relative, all the way through that process. But their meeting, their first encounter, is recorded in the Gospel of Luke in a story that we call the Visitation. And Mary enters, just barely pregnant, we presume, and Elizabeth's experiences that the child in her womb leaps for joy. And she says, how is it that the mother of my Lord comes to me? She speaks the word of a prophet. And Mary responds with Magnificat, that we just read and we just sang together. Mary responds, proclaiming God's greatness, proclaiming the vision of a world where God's dream has come true, where there's enough and more than enough for everyone, where the balances are made right, where the swords are beaten into plowshares. In 1849, a Unitarian pastor in Massachusetts wrote a hymn that we're probably all familiar with, in the bleak midwinter. And he sings about the angels' song. It's all about the angels calling their song to the shepherds. I think it could be about Angel Gabriel's call to Mary as well. And it says that, beneath the angel's song, the angels have continued to sing into our world, and beneath that song has rolled 2,000 years of wrong. And as we look around our world today, we might well say with Mary, how can this be? How can it be? I just heard this morning that my husband was reading a newspaper article that said that it's quite likely that all the Christians in the Holy Land might be wiped out. There's so few of them, right? And there won't be Christmas celebrations this year in Gaza. The services have been canceled. One of my sister's best friends from seminary works in the diocese, so I'm going to see if she's heard from him lately if the cathedral in Jerusalem will be holding services. How can it be that in the land of Jesus' birth, they can't even celebrate Christmas because of the conflict raging around them? How can it be, that children die, that loved ones disappear, that people continue to choose wrong, to choose self over life? How can it be that our planet is groaning out at the breaking point? How can these things be when God has come? As Jesus' other name, Emmanuel, the name prophesied for him. God is with us, and yet, how can all of these things be? We can ask that question a lot of times in our own personal lives too, whether it's personal tragedy or just, things don't feel right, feel stuck, or the dreams that I had for my life aren't working out, or the relationship that I had kind of counted on is not there for me. How can this be? And yet, we say God is with us, and our hearts with Mary's cry out for the vision, God's dream for this world. Last week, I talked about the fact that God is not a fixer. We all think that we want a fixer God. And I think that's why Jesus' miracles were so popular. But the miracles were really very practical, if you think about it. He needed to get from here to there as quickly as possible. He walks on the water. Got a bunch of people that are hungry. They're going to go away and faint because they kept him here preaching all day. We're going to just feed them. The miracles always have a purpose. But for the people, it became about the miracles. It became about a miraculous fix to a problem. But that's not what Jesus does and what God does in this world for the most part. A month ago, just before the start of Advent, at our bilingual family celebration, when we bring our atrium, our children's ministry presentations here into the sanctuary and experience them together, we went through a synthesis of all the infancy narratives, the first chapters of the Gospel of Luke and Matthew, which tell us the stories of the early years of Jesus. It's really worth your time this Christmas season if you haven't already. By the way, Christmas season, this is my favorite PSA, starts tomorrow and lasts until Yes, thank you very much. It's working. So you have now 13 days in which to go home and open your Bible and read the first couple of chapters of Luke and of Matthew. And then you'll find these wonderful stories, not just the birth of Jesus that we'll read tonight that we almost all have memorized, but several others, including and beginning with this Annunciation of the angel Gabriel to Mary, Mary's visitation of her cousin Elizabeth, of course, the birth, the adoration of the shepherds, the adoration of the Magi, which we celebrate on Epiphany, and then the flight into Egypt, never portrayed in our Christmas pageants. That Mary and Jesus and Joseph had to flee, had to run away from Herod's wrath and hide out in Egypt for a while. We should probably end the Christmas pageant, with the Holy Family running away because they were refugees. They had to. It's the Bible tells us. But as this small group of us looked at all of these stories as a whole, what really struck me was that, the Magi went to Jerusalem, they went to the palace looking for the newborn king for a reason. Right? Because that's where you'd expect to find a king. And the angels, you would expect the birth of a Messiah to be accompanied by an angel chorus, but you'd think they would pick maybe larger, more significant audience than a small band of shepherds out in the field. But God doesn't choose what we think God should choose. God doesn't come into the seats of power, into the center. God comes on the edges, in the margins, in the powerless, the impoverished, the places in the world where there's not a lot, where we don't look for hope and for salvation in those places in our own lives we discount. Right? But that's where God chooses to come. And yet, where do we continue to look for the changes that we want to see in our world? We continue to look to governments, to power sources, to structures, to celebrities, to large non-governmental organizations. You know? Maybe God's doing what God has always done. Maybe God is at work in this world, in our own lives, in our hearts, around the edges, in small ways that we might not notice if we don't pay close attention. A theologian has said that it doesn't matter that Jesus came 2,000 years ago. It doesn't matter that Jesus was born all those years ago if Jesus isn't born in us. So my question for you this Christmas, and take all Christmastide to ponder it. I love how many times the gospel says, and Mary pondered. Mary was a ponderer, so I think we can model ourselves on her pondering. But I would pray that you ponder God's call in your life. That the angel might be showing up to you today and saying, "Greetings, favored one. The Lord is with you." God has chosen you to bring God's life into this world, because if not you, then who? It's going to take all of us. It's going to take all of our yeses to God to turn this world around. And too many people, whether out of evil or malice or selfishness or just apathy, are saying no every single day. Will you say yes? Now? Will you help God be born in this world? I ask this question in the name of the one who is come and is to come, Jesus the Christ. Amen.